This program is brought to you by Emory University.
I have a question to throw out for a starter, and maybe then I can go around and collect some questions. I think I want to address this to Ron. How did you come to the judgment that you had enough financial resources to retire?
She knows I'm the financial planning nut.
Yes.
Make this very brief.
Any questions?
Early in my life, I lost a father about age 18, and then a mother 10 years later. I had a short course on what it takes to try to survive for the next 10 years and dig one's way out. That left a marked impression on me. So that drove me to probably emphasize financial planning more than most people do. We started in probably our 40s and did our first, what I'll call very rough first approximation of long-run economics. And then every 5 years roughly, kind of updated that. And I would argue that it's useful to start trying that long list, even though you know it's never going to occur. It's not a forecast, it's not a contract, but what it does, like nothing else, if you do it carefully, it'll force you to think through in excruciating detail everything you try to anticipate you might want to do or need. And to me, it served two purposes for me that were important. On the one hand, I knew something about being short of resources, and you can overdo trying to save and live at a lower standard of living than you might otherwise if you overcorrect. At the other extreme, the one most people I think are more vulnerable for, you can overspend. And if you don't understand the long-term consequences of your finances, you're very vulnerable to that. And I didn't want to be vulnerable to either extreme. So I look at that kind of planning as narrowing down the range and trying to avoid the real stupid things in the extremes. The rest is an amorphous mess. I've been retired for 7 years. When they lower me away, maybe I can talk about retirement in a sensible way. I've never had a long-term game plan. I've never had a comprehensive game plan. What we've done, my wife and I talk with each other with great frequency. We get frustrated with each other, but I have a prominent other, and we work it out together. We've been doing it for 54 years. So I've got that bedrock, and I got 2 children I trust. So now I'm Papa Grandpa, which is great. The financial planning serves a purpose. It forces you to think in more detail than you otherwise would. Second, it may help you avoid some of the extremes in life that you don't realize you're setting yourself up for quite often until it's too late.
I retired the first time when I was 60. And I retired because I could meet, at that time, the Emory criteria for age and years of service, and they were just about to change that. So, and my husband was retired, so I retired. But then I had nobody to play with. He retired, and then he moved out of town to take work in Washington. And so, you know, there I was, and I must say I had a difficult time. I had no playmates. All my friends were still working. I hadn't done this strategic planning that we had a presentation on today. And so I was sort of betwixt and between. Fortunately, this position at CDC fell into my lap. But that helped. But I will say, even after I left CDC, I think there's a void, a space, that if you can just be with it and not get too anxious, things emerge, and I mean, that's been my experience. I thought I had to fill the time up, that you just sit with it and it's happened.
A friend of mine described it as like losing a loved one for a while, and then you come out of a funk or a depression. Is that true?
Well, I think I haven't lost a loved one, but I think it's probably a grief, certainly loss of an identity. And I faced that same question, well, what do you do when you meet somebody at a party? And I was pretty uncomfortable comfortable for a while. I had worked all my life, and now I'm not. I can say I do whatever I want to do.
There is a way, I think, though, to continue with your professional identity, even if you're not employed by a university. I don't know what it is you do, but certainly the skills that you developed over a long period of time are probably translatable into something very similar, perhaps on a volunteer basis, where you might find yourself tremendously enthusiastic about your ability to help other people in a very tangible way.
Just realize you can change. And if something bothers you, okay, fine, start to cope with it. Don't let it accumulate over time. Take it as it comes. Small pieces of a big problem are more crackable than the big problem.
I think the key to a successful retirement is to know each morning when you get up what you're going to do that day. You cannot live through a bunch of empty space. We all know people, avid golfers, who retire, move to Florida, they're going to play golf every day. It rains for 2 years. They don't know what to do. They don't read books. They have nothing which they can do indoors. The beauty of retirement, to my mind, is that with some exceptions, I am master of my time. I can do what I want, when I want, and nobody except my wife and the IRS basically can make me do something I don't want. If it doesn't get done today, it can get done tomorrow. I have continued. I've had 2 books published this year. I've had 7 books published in retirement and a total of about 130 articles and notes. I've enjoyed it. I have traveled a great deal. 42 separate times to Germany. Munich has the best collection of libraries that I have ever seen. I used to go at least twice a year to Munich. I have spent the equivalent of 2 full academic years in Italy, mostly Rome. I was Fulbright professor in Germany, visiting professor at Brigham Young. I did not know Mr. Romney. I became aware of what kind of people the Mormons are. And I would give them thumbs up all the way. Except they don't drink coffee.
I have a question that came from the audience. It's actually a double question. I'll ask the second part. What expectations of you did your family have? Many retirees seem to find that their family expects them to take on roles. How do you define happiness now? John?
Well, one role that I find myself filling that I didn't anticipate is as a member of the sandwich generation. My wife's mother lives here now after having moved to Atlanta from Texas, and she's failing and requires a great deal more attention and care than she used to. And that's an expectation I didn't count on. But my wife is still employed full-time, and so it falls to me quite often to take her to the doctor or eye appointment or something like that. And I'm not objecting to that. I'm just saying I hadn't anticipated that, perhaps as well as I should have. And the same thing is true of your children, I think. They think, well, you have a lot of time. You can do this for me. So I think you have to guard against that and sort of set limits ahead of time, so you know how much you'll be able to do for them and how much you won't be able to do for them.
Bert, did you want to add to that?
Yes. My wife is 6 years plus older than I. She'll be 90 in a few months. She gave up driving some years ago. I am the family chauffeur. Doctor's appointments, beauty parlor, this, that, and the other. We used to do the public shopping together. I do it alone. Bit by bit, all the household chores, except cooking dinner, have fallen to me. And I think she may be in a retirement home before Christmas. Her energy is just out. But I think this is part of being a human being. I live in the condo across from the law school. There are numerous Emory Emeritus there, as well as from other institutions. There's a 3-year-old girl. The range of ages is marvelous. Marvelous. Across the hall from us was a woman from Georgia State. My wife taught at Georgia State. They knew each other when they were both teachers. She has just been diagnosed with fast-paced Parkinson's. I don't think she'll ever come back to her youth. One of the beauties, advantages of living in a place like a condominium is there are invariably people who come into the breach. There are 4 of us. Across the hall from her in the other direction is an Emory woman who's retired. Up on the top floor is a retired nurse whose husband taught at Agnes Scott. There's a woman who's the widow of a man who was in the Emory Library for years, until he died early, and I. And among the 4 of us, we kept her going for some time. And now I collect the mail. Other things happen. But when you're alone, people living by themselves, there's nobody like that necessarily in the neighborhood. And your children may be living in places like California and Canada.
I want to ask something a little bit fun. Frank, what's your main activity or pastime now that you're retired? Ron, I'm sorry. Called you by your last name.
Working on the administrative side of this university and a couple of others, all I read were memos from paragraphs and junk from the local castellar. Now I can actually read literature, and I love to read. So I am a member of a book discussion group, which has a bunch of souls who are about I'm 79, but a little older than I am. And we read all kinds of fiction, non-fiction classics, once every 6 weeks. And I've also joined the Great Decisions Center, Foreign Policy Association, and I thoroughly enjoy those activities. And other than that, as I said, I now define myself as the adding grandpa. We've got one daughter in Phoenix and another daughter who lives in the Chicago suburbs. And we're headed for Phoenix tomorrow for a week, and we're headed for Chicago the next month, and we're headed for the whole family getting together in December. As I said, we have a family we get along with and thoroughly enjoy, and we have invested, my wife and myself both, because she also was a professional, much more time with family and family integration. I have a grandson. He hasn't asked me, he's 8 years old. He hasn't asked me about financial planning yet.
Well, I've always been interested, yes, you're right, in gardening and more recently trees, but I never really had time to pursue that. So it wasn't until after I retired that I took the Master Gardener program and the tree keeper program and those kinds of things. So now I spend a lot of time outside when the weather permits and we have enough rain.
In answer to that question, I think one of the things that should be part of any planning for retirement, is an inventory of all the things that you realize you do well. And you may have forgotten the things you did when you were a teenager, you do very well. Or perhaps there are things that you would like to do well, and now you will have time to try them again. That sort of thing. I think that you'll find the list is pretty long, and you will not be at a loss for things to do. Let me also put in a plug for physical activity. My own case is this. I retired a year ago in August, so I'm just freshly retired. And I tried to remain physically active during all the years I was teaching and in college, but I never had time. Never had enough time actually to lose the little bit of a paunch, you know, that I developed and to really get fit. Well, suddenly there's all this time, and suddenly there's the opportunity to launch yourself into a fitness program and also learn how to eat better and learn how to cook better. Those are things I'm doing.
Very good.
I have really no hobbies except running. I started running in 1945, and with the exception of breaks when there were injuries during basic training in the Army, I've been doing it ever since. I shall boast slightly. I have a medal from the Boston Marathon. Slow time. I ran this morning. I go out 4 times a week. I'm a great track and field enthusiast. I've seen 3 Olympics, 9 World Championships, British Commonwealth Games, and so forth. And I'm considered, in a way, the local Atlanta expert on track records. If you want to know the record for the women's 5,000 meters, I'll tell you. But this has kept me going. But considering what Rob said, the program of Ollie over on the Briarcliff campus, which existed when I came in 1960 as evening at Emory, is a godsend. I've taught it the last 7 years there. Last year I did 2 courses, most of them Roman, but 2 on Jane Austen. I'm not an expert, I just fell in love with her. My sister, who is older, in 1940, fell in love with Laurence Olivier in Pride and Prejudice. She loved his legs in those scenes. And she wanted me to read Pride and Prejudice. It didn't work. I didn't know what English society was like. As with Shakespeare, the history plays. Why is the Bishop of Ely leading an army? Where is the Duke of Northumberland? Why is he important? When I started going to England and realized that if you were a young woman without financial resources and did not get married, you had very few prospects. All of them rather miserable. Most people in that period died within 20 miles of where they were born.
I did. The English department threw a party for me and another person who was retiring. It was a lovely sort of buffet dinner and speeches and so forth. It was quite nice. And it was important to me.
Did you get the chair? Emory chair?
Ron, did you have something to say about that?
In both cases, finishing as a dean, Emory put together a soiree for me, and then finishing in Singapore, a soiree. I did better than you did, because fella, I got a chair.
Well, I did too.
But by the
Very
way,
lovely.
I very much enjoy and appreciated my colleagues in those ceremonies. I enjoyed the fact that they bothered to put them on.
I guess that's a sign of the economy that you're no longer getting chairs.
Oh, I got a chair.
You got
It's a very lovely chair. painted black, and it has the Emory seal.
Any other questions?
Not a rock.
Well, when we started the financial planning, it wasn't obvious we could sustain darn near anything.
Yeah.
That evolved a long time later. It mainly, again, I don't want to repeat it, but was because of the earlier life experiences for me. It wasn't bound up in any great thing or plan. I really believe that that is the main thing which, if you resolve, you'll have a better sense of all the other things you imagine you'd like to do, of what's reasonable to do. Fortunately, many things are free, but a lot of things cost money. And if you have a better chance of sense of your capacity, you'll spend more time on what's feasible and less frustration on the things you really wanted to do and then found out you couldn't. The sooner you bite the bullet, I think the better off you are.
What kind of advice do you give to that sort of person who needs to catch up?
Not much. Not good. Frankly, I've never had, fortunately, the experience. And I think lacking that experience, it's hard to give things other than kind of banal things, like when you want to look at professional alternatives and what you can do to train. My daughter in Phoenix is mentoring a young lady who's from a markedly disadvantaged family. Her mother, was father, lost a job and went back to school for a year. And now has a techie job, a support job in a pharmacy. Well, okay. Took a lot of guts, but she did it.
These things do happen and they have happened in the past
Frequently, yeah.
decade, where the unexpected crisis arises and you find yourself drained financially. And
one of the reasons you want to do, I think, financial planning as early as you reasonably can start is to think about, have you been trying to build, you may not be able to, but to the extent that you have the capacity to do it, have you built any kind of buffer so if something does happen, you aren't automatically taken down? Now, some families don't have that buffer, and it's not within the range of getting it. But many people could have that buffer if they only thought about it enough in advance.
My wife and I never wanted to live in a retirement home. I don't want to sound arrogant, but it's very depressing when you see large numbers of wheelchairs and walkers every time you go to the hall. And where we are across the way, we go from 3 years to 90. Emory students, law students, medical, and whatnot, retirees, people still very active. And I think it's much better. But my wife and I decided, we lived in a house about a half mile from here on the way to Farmington. There came a point that we wanted to downsize. I hate that word. I can't think of a better one. And that's hard. I gave 300 books to the Emory Library, gave 2,000 slides to the art history department. You can learn to get along without it. And where we live now, I think this is crucial. Living where you can do what you want easily.
yeah.
Takes me 5 minutes to get to the library, assuming I can cross North Decatur, which is a constant travel.
I have heard that there is a trend that's been going on for 7 or 8 years of people in retirement moving to cities, to pedestrian, like smaller cities, like maybe Portland, Maine, that type of city where everything is within reach, and discovering a new kind of life. I think we have to wrap up now.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.